Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here tonight. We'll go ahead and get started with our talk for the evening. My name is Pierce Paul Kreisman, and it's my pleasure to serve as the Executive Director of the American Center of Research. And we're very grateful that you're sharing your evening with us tonight. We have a very interesting topic ahead for you. It's my pleasure to introduce Andrea Flynn, who is a PhD candidate studying the truly intimidating combination, if I might add, of applied linguistics and technology at Iowa State University. She is the recipient of Fulbright and Boren fellowships and awards from the Center for Arabic Studies Abroad. So she is well versed in this. I hope we can all buckle up and be excited to learn about this. This is a topic that touches very close to home for ACOR because we've been working for nearly the last decade to build a robust collection of a digital archive. And that digital archive in a new iteration is going to start including more text. And so we want to make sure that we know what to do with this text. So how can large collections of machine-readable data support Arabic as a second language in the classroom? Andrea?
So it is fantastic to see so many familiar faces here tonight. This research would not have been possible without the support of many people in this room and without the support of Hayes Fulbright, Boren, the Center for Arabic Study Abroad, and most importantly, the interviewees and survey participants who were so generous with their time and expertise. A special welcome to the people who helped me with this research. So, how can large collections of machine-readable data support Arabic as a second or foreign language in the classroom? Well, I would like to answer this question by asking another, and that is, why should we teach the Levantine dialect, which is spoken here in Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon, and Palestine to non-native speakers? And why should we use data-driven classroom materials to do this? After addressing this question, I'll tell you a little bit about the research that I have done to help develop these materials and talk about how we can use those materials. So, why should we teach the Levantine dialect to non-native speakers? In short, because there is demand for it from students and also from employers. And it's because of this demand that we've seen an increase in instruction. There is a demand for Arabic in general, and we can see that here. Arabic is one of the top 10 most studied languages in US colleges, and since 1990, there has been a six-fold increase in the number of enrollments in US colleges, and that's reflected locally. Here in Amman, we've seen a sharp increase in the number of language centers that we have to teach non-native speakers. We have Qasid near Sport City Circle. We have Sijal in Jebel Amman, Kelsey in Jebel Hussein. We have Amir East in Abdoun under the bridge. We have Middlebury in the Language Center at the University of Jordan and Shababik near 8th Circle. And in fact, the number of Americans studying Arabic here in Jordan increased tenfold between 2004 and 2010. That is the number studying here through the Institute of International Education, which is the parent organization for my program, Fulbright. And there are some other Fulbrighters here. Could you raise your hand if you're with Fulbright? So we're still a force here in Jordan. And during the Arab Spring, Jordan became the most sought-after destination for language learning in the Middle East. And it hasn't just been a shift in location, it's also been a shift in the kind of language that's being studied. For generations, Americans and other non-native speakers studied Fusha because they were interested in being able to translate and read scholarly texts. But now this is changing. 80% of students surveyed say that they now study the language in order to be able to communicate with native speakers orally. And for that, you need the dialect. There is also a demand not just from students, but also from employers. For example, in the humanitarian aid sector, more than 6.5 million people have been displaced by the civil war in Syria. And over 1.8 million Palestinians have been displaced in the ongoing conflict in Gaza. And having Arabic dialect skills, Levantine dialect skills, can help foreign aid workers to communicate with people who are being displaced, who are fleeing from conflict, or who are resettling in new countries. Having these dialect skills is also helpful to teachers in America in school districts with large Arab populations from the Levant, such as in Dearborn, Michigan, and in my hometown of San Diego, California. So we see demand from students and from employers. And it's because of this demand that we've seen so many new language institutes here in town. And we've also seen more textbooks for studying the dialect. Now there are older textbooks. You can find them here in the library at Acor. Here's one of the older ones. But even when you take this new wave of textbooks and the older materials into consideration, this field of studying and teaching the Levantine dialect is relatively underdeveloped if you compare it to the centuries of scholarship that's behind teaching modern standard Arabic to non-native speakers. Because this goes back to the time of Ibn Khaldun, because he wrote about this in his Muqaddimah. And if we look at technology, it's been harnessed far more for teaching English as a non-native language than it has for teaching Arabic. And its use for teaching the Levantine dialect is even less developed. But I would love to see technology assist Levantine dialect instruction more, especially Levantine dialect vocabulary instruction. How do we choose which words to prioritize, which words to teach first? Now, I'm interested in this because of my experience as a language learner. Like many Americans who studied from this textbook series, I was taught how to say United Nations before I could even say mom or dad. Did anyone else have this experience? Thank you. Yes. And it's because of that experience that I am interested in focusing on the frequency of words, teaching the words that will be most frequent and most useful first. Now, frequency hasn't always been a major consideration of instructors or textbook authors. And part of the reason for that is that it's difficult to acquire this information. But looking back through history, we can find some quantitative approaches when studying texts. For example, in the 13th century, Dominican friars looked at all of the words that appeared in the Vulgate Bible, and they listed them alphabetically. And they gave an example sentence for each entry, and they said the chapter and book in which it appeared. Of course, Arab grammarians undertook a similar study of the Holy Quran, and example sentences are often a part of learning Arabic. The emphasis on example sentences also shaped the writing of dictionaries, including the Oxford English Dictionary. Sir James Murray, when he was writing this dictionary in the 1800s, he asked people to find example sentences for certain rare words and write them down on little pieces of paper and to mail it into him. And you can see in this picture behind him all of those pieces of paper with example sentences. To help us imagine the gigantic effort that went into this, let's take a peek at a film that was made on this topic. We can get the gist of it in less than 1 minute.
We have been attempting to make this dictionary for the last 20 years, and I submit.
I appreciate your help. Yes.
That the extraordinary, the unconventional, Mr. Murray, is the solution and our salvation.
The task is gigantic.
And impossible.
There is a way. We'll ask them to read in search of the words that we want and get them to write the word on a slip of paper. So this is the good doctor. I'm proud to make your acquaintance, sir. I cannot believe my eyes. Partners, word for word. My entire life, all that I pursued has been in preparation for this. You think I know?
Thank you. Let's go back less than a minute.
We have been attempting to make this dictionary for the last 20 years, and I submit that the extraordinary, the unconventional, Mr. Murray, is the solution and our salvation.
The task is gigantic.
And impossible.
There is a way. We'll ask them to read in search of the words that we want and get them to write the word on a slip of paper. So this is the good doctor. I'm proud to make your acquaintance, sir. I cannot believe my eyes. Partners, word for word. My entire life, all that I pursued has been in preparation for this.
And so from this clip, we can see the immense effort that went into compiling this dictionary. But now we're living in the information age, and we have countless example sentences at our fingertips. And so I want to harness this information in order to answer this question. What are the high frequency words that distinguish Levantine Arabic from modern standard Arabic? And by answering that question, I'll prepare to create a frequency dictionary for the Levantine dialect, which will be a lot like this dictionary for modern standard Arabic, which already exists. And it doesn't just have an example sentence for each entry, but also an English translation for each sentence and frequency statistics. And we should allow frequency dictionaries like this to shape how we teach the Levantine dialect. Because when we teach the most frequent words, students will understand more of what they hear and more of what they see and gain proficiency faster. Now, in order to make this dictionary, I have collected nearly 2.5 million words in the Levantine dialect. And I've done that in such a way that if someone asked me, so how well does this database actually reflect the Levantine dialect? I would be able to answer with some precision. I would be able to answer because following the framework laid out in this handbook, Designing and Evaluating Language Corpora, I first looked at the breadth of materials available in the dialect. And these include films, television shows, podcasts, and even novels. And then second, I conducted a survey to ask native speakers how frequently each of these registers or categories was actually encountered in daily life. So first, I'll tell you about the interviews. I talked to 10 individuals who use or even produce this content. And these included, as you can see, a pastor and musician, 2 co-founders of language schools that focus on the dialect, an archaeologist who created a list of terms for use in their field, an author who's written a number of novels in the dialect, 2 cartoonists, an individual who is a YouTuber, a podcaster, a playwright, and an actress, someone who is an oral historian and also translates between English and the dialect and teaches the dialect, and finally, a film director. And my objective when I talked to each of these individuals was to get an overview of the most important works in their field of expertise. And once I had that information, I conducted a survey where I had 16 native speakers write down for me every way that they used language during 4 hours. So for example, if they overheard a song in a coffee shop, they wrote that fact down for me in a logbook. They recorded the time of language use, the type of use, in this case a song, and the length of use, how many minutes they listened to that song. And they recorded this use in greater detail in an online survey. And they categorized that use into one of 41 categories. You can see some of the categories here, including announcement or YouTube video or audiobook or phone call. Now you might wonder, so how accurate is all of this data? Couldn't a participant write down whatever they wanted on that logbook and be done with it in 5 minutes? To account for this possibility, I took a number of steps to allow for data triangulation or verification. For example, there was an app which monitored their data use on their phone for all 4 hours, and it saw which apps they used on their phone and for how long. And so I compared this against what they reported. I also monitored one individual for all 4 hours to see how accurate the data that they recorded was. And I directly asked my participants about the quality of the data they reported and any challenges that they faced. You might also think to yourself, okay, well, 16 people is not an accurate reflection of the whole Levant, right? And so to account for this, I also observed thousands of non-participants. For 4 hours, I observed people in a library, for another 4 in a cafe, and for another 4 on a nearby college campus. And I observed no instances of language use that were not reported by the 16 participants. For example, even though there are some comic books in the dialect, and even though there are some novels, I didn't see anyone consuming either of those, which indicates that what was reported by the 16 is reflective of wider trends to some extent. After I undertook these steps for data triangulation, I rejected data from one person because their data fell more than 2 standard deviations outside the norm, and some of what they reported was contradictory. But from the remaining data, I arrived at these results, and I saw that the majority of dialect use could be accounted for by conversation, as you might expect. To be precise, 61% of dialect use was conversation. Next, songs accounted for 9%, YouTube videos for 7%, telephone calls for 3%, and then text messages and social media together made up 9%. And it's interesting how much writing there was in the dialect, because traditionally, writing in the dialect has been uncommon or even discouraged for religious and political reasons. But on the other hand, some people see writing in the dialect as a positive phenomenon. And among these individuals is Salsan Khalil from Cambridge, she's among those that say that traditional media is controlled by organizations that enforce linguistic standards. But on the other hand, social media is in the digital realm, which is largely free of these controls. It's part of Web 2.0, an iteration of the internet where a lot of content isn't created by formal organizations, but by individuals, ordinary people. And when they write in the dialect, in the language of the people, this could be an expression of democratization. And some of the local language schools that teach the dialect teach how to write in the dialect, because this is a skill that's used by native speakers. So when I took into account the data from the surveys and also the results from the interviews, that gave me what I needed to set out and look for data in the dialect that was readily available for statistical analysis. Now let's look at what I found. I downloaded nearly 100,000 words in YouTube videos from 2 websites. One of those websites was Youglish. As you can see here, it provides subtitles all in the dialect. And the other website is Playling, which also provides subtitles in the dialect. I would highly recommend both of these to any language learners. I also found over 200,000 words in comments written about articles from the newspaper, this newspaper. Of course, the articles are in modern standard Arabic. It's the comments that are in the dialect. And I found over 500,000 words in song lyrics and nearly 1.5 million in recorded telephone conversations. When I started this project, I was hoping for 1 million words in the dialect. I currently have almost 2.5 million. So now that the database exists, we can go back to the question of how well does this data actually reflect the Levantine dialect? If we compare the dialect to the populations of Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, and Syria, we can see here that Lebanese is overrepresented in the database and Syrian is underrepresented. The reason for that is that most of the participants who had their telephone calls recorded were Lebanese, and the American initiative that recorded the calls probably had difficulty getting permission from Syria to record the calls. When we compare the database to these results, we can see that the songs are overrepresented and the other 3 registers or categories are underrepresented, especially conversations and YouTube videos. And for that reason, I'm currently adding more data to these 2 categories. For the statistical analysis, I compared my database, which is in the dialect, to a database of modern standard Arabic called the Arabic Gigaword 3rd edition. And I used this software from Brigham Young University called Word Cruncher to perform the analysis. And I ran it using a number of different statistical approaches. The one that was most appropriate was a frequency-based analysis introduced in 2014 by Gardner and Davies. And the reason that it's appropriate is that it was made to identify vocabulary words to teach in the classroom. And it doesn't just identify them, but also ranks them in the order that you would teach them by their frequency. It also has safeguards against including words which are only frequent in one part of the database. So for example, range ensures that words are not included on the list that are only frequent in songs or only frequent in YouTube videos or conversations or social media. Next, we have dispersion measure. Dispersion measure ensures that a word is evenly distributed across the whole database and that it's not just frequent in one conversation where a speaker brings it up again and again and again. Songs could also pose the same problem. Let's look at one example of where a word might come up again and again in a song. So you can see how that song could drive up the numbers for a number of lexical items. And I'm betting that you can imagine, you can think of songs that are even more repetitive. Moving on to discipline measure. Let me ask you a question. What's the first word you say when you pick up the phone? All right. Exactly as you said, and as our singer said. And I'll bet that you say hello on the phone much more frequently than you do on social media. What discipline measure does is exclude words which appear in one category 3 times as frequently or more. And we need safeguards like this in databases like mine, where one category is much larger than the others. And that's why this analysis was appropriate. Before I show you the results, let me ask you to imagine that your goal is to help these 3 motivated American students who just arrived in Amman understand as much of what they read and hear as possible. They've studied Fusha in America for 2 years, but they have never studied the dialect. So what are 3 words that you want to teach them? Take a second to consider this question and feel free to check in with the person next to you.
What is the question? Sorry.
The question is, you have these students, they've never studied the dialect before, but they do know modern standard Arabic. What are 3 helpful words that you could teach these girls? Yeah, I like that answer. Okay, yeah.
I would imagine if they are new in town, what they need to say mostly, how much it is, because they will need to buy things
And how would you ask that?
a day.
Okay, and would they have learned that if they had only studied modern standard Arabic?
No, the
No.
Fusha is come.
Okay, so they need that.
Yeah, because actually, sorry to interrupt.
No, I'm
Very
grateful.
humbly, I'm a professor to the VIPs, English, French, Arabic, and Spanish. And the Fusha is totally a different language than the spoken. I am sure you know that. It's not only a dialect, the spoken. It's another language. Almost every word is different.
I'm happy to hear that. I might want to talk to you afterwards because I am interested in that kind of thing.
Yes, they are totally different languages. It's like the Catalan in Spain, in Barcelona, and the Castellano, which is the official Spanish language. Totally different languages, not a dialect in the Levant region. I mean, the spoken, all the spoken everywhere. Arabic is another language.
I found data that agrees with you. So I'm very interested in that. And I would expect that the things that people thought about had to do with introducing yourself, about exchanging pleasantries, about making simple purchases, just like you said. But what this statistical analysis brings to the table is that it helps us think about words that might not have occurred to us otherwise, about differences between modern standard Arabic and Levantine Arabic. So let's take a peek at these results. Here we've got the 25 most frequent words that were present in Levantine Arabic, but absent from the Modern Standard Arabic database. And we can see some patterns in this data. Some of the differences between Modern Standard Arabic and the Levantine dialect were just orthographic, just related to spelling. For instance, in these highlighted words, we can see that ya was used instead of a kasra in these feminine words. Some of the differences are morphological and can be taught as generalizable rules, such as that the letter B can be prefixed to a lot of present tense verbs, or how the preposition ala can be shortened to the letter ein and prefixed to words such as these three here. And other differences are serious, lexico-semantical differences that need to be taught one by one. So now that the statistical analysis has helped us find these differences, what can we do with them? Well, existing textbooks could make manageable adjustments before their next edition and include some of these frequent words. And if they don't include some of the generalizable rules, they could add them. And if the way that they spell words in the dialect doesn't reflect the orthographic trends that are emerging online, they could change the spelling of some words so that they better reflect what most people are doing on the internet. And so what this analysis offers is manageable adjustments that can be made to existing textbooks, and it can guide the creation of new materials so that students are taught the words that occur frequently and that will help them understand more of what they hear and what they see. And that is how large collections of machine-readable data can support Arabic in the second or foreign language classroom. Thank you.
You have to answer questions. And I will abuse the privilege of having the microphone and ask the first one. So you go through all of this spectacular effort and produce a phenomenally useful tool for humanity. How often are you going to update it? Because the language and the internet change so regularly.
Yes. Thank you. This is so tied to my interests that I can't help myself. I keep looking at emerging resources because it's one of my favorite things to do. So I will continue to build this.
So what I hear is you need a tenured job for the rest of your life to keep doing this so that we can have this tool available to us.
Love that.
Okay. Other questions? Nice questions. You people play nice.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. You talked about diversity between different types of source, so songs versus the internet. To what extent are you also trying to look at different speakers in their different age ranges? So difference between old and young speakers? To what extent does it matter that some people are professionals, others are and have higher education, others don't? To what extent does gender matter in all of this? To what extent is men's dialect different from women's dialect? And to what extent does that have to come into what you do in what you look at?
I see people nodding. Absolutely. These factors matter. It's outside the scope of my research. I didn't try to create separate categories for gender or age, but in an ideal circumstance, yeah, you would do that.
Okay.
Yes.
I wonder how you could make that applicable across a lot of different curriculums across the world. So coming from England, how could you put that into place within the national curriculum and how would that have an impact?
For the study of foreign languages, having data-driven classroom materials is beneficial. There are more resources available for many languages in the world. And so getting teachers in touch with those resources is something that I would love to see.
I have some dictionaries like Spanish and French, and they are a bit inclusive. For example, they give a structure for how to conjugate the verbs, because I would imagine somebody who wants to learn a language must have a structure, because if he meets a verb, to know how to do it with different persons in the present, in the past. Thank God that in Arabic, we only have 3 tenses, present, past, and future. We don't have any more. It's how they change by adding a prefix and a suffix according to the persons. The easiest one is the future, because it's a repetition of the present. You only, in the spoken language, you only say rah. You just put the word rah, which means I will in English. But I think in the dictionaries that I have, the last pages include a structure of how to conjugate, like the system. Of course, there are always in every language, there are irregular verbs, but in general, there is sort of a structure so that people, when they meet the verb for a different person or for a different timing, that was studied in a particular phrase, they want to repeat this verb in another phrase. Do they have the system in your system? Do they have a structure, how to change? This is my question.
Yes, my focus is on vocabulary, but there are researchers who study syntax and morphology using large collections of data. The Longman Dictionary for written and spoken English is an example of a dictionary that's based on data. And this can give us insights to usages that are not prescriptively correct, things that you wouldn't have learned when you were studying grammar in elementary school, but that people actually say. Not to promote McDonald's, but I'm loving it. You wouldn't usually use the present progressive with a verb like love, would you? But people do it. And so that's something that we should help learners understand.
We'll take one more question.
Yes, well, I wanted to ask, with native Arabic speakers, how often are they going to be using English words? Well, like I'm loving it. Do people in Jordan say I'm loving it in their casual conversations, or how does this impact your word frequency analysis, foreign language words that are being used?
I did have to think about that because there are a lot of foreign words that appear in the dialect, right? The way that I approached that was, if it was written in English characters, I omitted that because I'm trying to analyze the Levantine dialect. But if it was written in Arabic characters, I analyzed it.
Did you do the same with other dialect words that commonly get thrown in, for example, by those of us who might have learned in Egypt and use things like become instead of a dish?
I tried to only use sources that were Levantine so that I would avoid having to deal with other dialects.
Okay. The rest of this seems to me very much like we would all benefit from adjourning and being able to talk to you more one-on-one. So for those of us joining us online, thank you very much. For the rest of us, I invite you over to some refreshments. Thank you.